that I've waited for now is what I was created for now. I'm gonna let you know what I'm feeling now. I must be quite emphatical. I'm feeling plain ecstatical. Wow. I might just float right up to the ceiling. The joy inside me, the smile you see, it's for one reason alone. The time and place where I want to be is holy hot damn, right where I am now. The past is too historical now. The future needs an oracle now. Is when you feel euphorical. Trust me, your crowning achievement, your greatest prize will come on the day that you realize the moment you're living for. Wow, is now.
Hi, everybody out there. Well, tonight, with this world in such turmoil, particularly this country, I'm going to talk to Ben Davidson. Let me tell you about him. He's worked professionally in the investment field, primarily in a due diligence capacity, holds a Juris Doctorate, has clerked in the Ohio Supreme Court, and is now considered an independent researcher. Due diligence is his forte because he believes that to fully understand the situation, you need to understand the law, the numbers, the science, while simultaneously making predictive analysis and judgments about often conflicting data. So, Ben Davidson's passion is space weather analysis, and he has it's called a Suspicious Observers Project, and he holds an online audience of over 280,000 viewers. His regular 3 to 4 minute daily updates on solar, earthquake, geophysical, and weather activity are widely regarded as unique and highly professional. He also created the Mobile Observatory Project, observatoryproject.com, Observing the Frontier, spaceweathernews.com, magneticreversal.org, and quakewatch.net, a unique and remarkably accurate earthquake forecasting website. So we're going to be talking to Ben Davidson about all this stuff, which I'm very interested in these days, because I often speak about how nature follows consciousness. Anyway, welcome, Ben Davidson. So glad to talk to you, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well.
Okay, Ben, what is happening in the weather? What is your kind of let's say thumbnail description of what's going on? Look at the central of the country and the south. Oh my goodness! All the weather in California has shifted. We're not in a drought anymore. Thank goodness we have rain. But what is really happening here? Do you have a conclusion?
Well, that is a very, very expansive question, my friend. There's a lot of things happening. One, there is natural climate variability, and the climate is always changing. Two, you can't put anything into a system and expect it not to affect the outcome. The way we pollute and the other ways we affect our world, like deforestation and other things like that, they do play a role in what the atmospheric chemistry is like, what the weather is like, what the soil chemistry is like, things like that. But what seems to be lost on most people is just how much the sun and Earth's magnetic field play a role in not just the weather, earthquakes, volcanoes, our health, technological susceptibility to things like electrical surges, shorts, and other electrical natural phenomena, things like that. A lot of that stuff doesn't seem to be as well understood. Of course, the whole humans are causing global warming with our pollution thing, that's well known by most people. Unfortunately, it's only part of the story. The fact that Earth's climate varies naturally over time and always has and probably always will, most people have a fairly good understanding or can understand that. But when it comes to the sun and the way that the sun interacts with Earth electromagnetically, people really don't have a good grasp on all of those things.
Let me ask you, Ben, is this really cyclical? Are we talking about the the 3,600 time period cycle or the 6,100 time period cycle? Is that also part of your calculations?
Neither one of those seems to be on par with what we're actually seeing right now. Um, what we're seeing right now, pretty much everything can be explained by the changes in Earth's magnetic field and the changes on the sun. I'm actually not familiar with that 6,000-year one or so, but a lot of folks talking about the 3,600-year cycle like to talk about a Planet X or Nibiru or something coming into our solar system.
What do you think about that?
As fantastical of a story as it is a complete hoax to think anything is happening now with that. There is not a single moon out of place. The notion that, they're watching it and they're hiding it is utterly ludicrous. 99% of the comets and the meteors that are actually discovered now and the exoplanets and other things like that are not done by officials. They're done by amateur astronomers because we have 98% of the technology that the officials have, and yet we outnumber them 10,000 to 1, and we're always watching from all around the world, North Pole to South Pole, all the time. And they are actually the people who discover most of these new things, not NASA, not Hubble. When they discover something, they point Hubble at it,
right.
They have a reason to point it there. So there's nothing being hidden. And believe me, all of these folks would love to be the one who discovered something amazing like that. Heck, they'd get to name it after themselves. And the vast majority of these folks actually have kind of a track record of being anti-mainstream. Not all of them go as far as, to say things like NASA stands for never a straight answer. Not sure if you've ever heard that. Although many of them do many of them actually do say things like that on their website. And, we're talking about folks who have comets named after them. And these are folks who are unquestionably on our side, and they all agree. There is nothing coming in now. People fake a lot of stuff on YouTube videos and other stuff on the internet with different satellites. It's actually quite easy to do that. I actually have some tutorials for people how to show how to spot a fake and things like that. But we could probably talk for a long time about how we know nothing's coming in. Like, for example, all the changes that we see are electromagnetic, and there's not a single gravitational anomaly anywhere to be found. People who tie this to the 2012 stuff with the Mayans and everything, that's not actually as far off as one might consider. People consider the 2012 stuff to be a massive failure. But if people know what that was really supposed to be, it was supposed to be the resetting of the cycle. And it looks like the sun's cycle actually reset within about 2 or 3 years of that. And what I'm talking about is about a 400-year cycle on the sun, give or take. You know how long a Mayan Baktun is, by the way, right?
Oh, God, refresh me.
390 some years. It's essentially the exact same as the grand solar cycle. What happens is the sun spends, a few decades very, very quiet. And that's really not good for our planet. That's what's about to happen now. Then over a few centuries, it sort of ramps up to a maximum slowly. And then it sort of drops off into another minimum very sharply at the end of the 400-year cycle. Well, the last time that we've seen a lot of some of the weather patterns that we're seeing now, some of the volcanic activity we're seeing now, they seem to be on these 400-year time scales. Now, granted, that's not something you're going to get from NOAA, who refuses to, give you temperature data back before 1888. But there are many researchers who will give you longer data, and you can see whether you're looking at temperatures, you're looking at oscillations in the atmosphere. And I don't want to get too technical, but if people have ever heard of the North Atlantic Oscillation or the Pacific Decadal Oscillation or the El Nino La Nina cycle, which many people have probably heard of, these show these long-term cycles, and everything points to a lot of the changes we're seeing being the result of these patterns shifting the same way they do every 400 years when the sun does this. Only now there's tens of millions of people right in the way of these shifts. We have built our society over the last 100, 200, 300 years based on some of these monsoon patterns, some of the drought patterns. We know which rivers are going to overflow annually or seasonally, things like that. And we've built our world around this. The problem is it changes every 400 years. We haven't had our world in an opportunity to deal with those changes. And we're already seeing what happens when these patterns shift. And the way we've set up our world is now putting most people in, whether you want to call it the bullseye or in the line of fire. That's a big
well, let's talk about that, Ben, because we've been so concerned with the different patterns and rivulets of the Earth's behavior, but you're talking about the sun's behavior, which we haven't paid a lot of attention to, correct? That's what you want us to focus our
Well, we haven't heard much of it from the mainstream scientists and mainstream news just yet. We have just to sort of frame the story, we are going on 22 years of failed global warming predictions. They were able to say over the last 2 years that the global temperatures were the hottest ever. And, and depending on how you look at the statistics, one might actually be able to make that argument. The problem is what they projected for this time period was way, way higher. And that's without an El Nino, the strongest El Nino ever. It took the strongest El Nino ever to get where we got the last 2 years, and they still didn't sniff their predictions. What's going to happen over the next few years as we lack that record El Nino and the sun continues to quiet down is going to be a stark contrast to what the last few decades have been. And there's many folks who are talking about this as well. This is certainly not just something I'm pulling out of my behind. There are a lot of folks with proper credentials, like John Casey, who worked as a White House science advisor and has been at the top of a lot of policy stuff for a long time, or Dr. Roy Spencer, who spent his entire career at NASA. Numerous professors all over the United States and abroad as well. I just happen to be the one you have on the phone who happens to know who happens to know everything they said and can pull it out of his head pretty much.
Okay, let's concretize it, and let's put into a nutshell what you're all saying.
Well, of course, there's a lot of differences in what a lot of folks are saying. I'm not really the kind of guy who's going to model things and make equations. All I can really do is take observations and, work with what I can actually observe and get my eyes on and my hands on, so to speak.
Well, I'm just wondering, with everything so chaotic in people's minds, that energy that's put out, that chaos, that sense of uncertainty, of fear, all the stuff going on with the Trump things, especially in this country. I can only talk about this country, if that's all right now. And I'm just wondering if let's say the electrical energy of the mood of people affects the weather. Let's start with that.
It's tough to say if it affects the weather. It certainly affects us personally, and it affects each other. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Global Consciousness Project.
Help me.
The Global Consciousness Project was started by Dr. Roger Nelson at Princeton in the 70s. They have literally thousands of peer-reviewed, statistically verified demonstrations of human brain waves actually having an effect, a physical phenomena effect on the natural world. Of course, this is phenomenal that they're actually doing this. All you really need to do is hear the power of laughter or the power of positivity, or meet a really magnetic person, or have somebody's bad mood rub off on you, to know that these energies, these emotions, what it really boils down to at heart is the types of brain waves that our brain is producing. These things have incredible effects on our surroundings. And it's interesting that you mentioned uncertainty, because they have now moved the Global Consciousness Project into a new phase. We actually just talked about it recently on a podcast. They're starting to identify the types of human brainwaves and the types of emotions and feelings that actually can produce these physical phenomena in the real world. And they break them down into 4 categories. And those 4 categories are intention, meaning, resonance, and uncertainty. Of course, intention would be, visualizing what you want, asking the universe for help, putting it out there. I'm not sure if you know anything about that. It would basically be the more evolved version of storyboarding, or vision boarding, I should say. And so, that would be intention. Uncertainty would be fear, anxiety, or uncertainty itself. It's a little more difficult to parse out what meaning and resonance might be, but the point is that we do have an effect on the world. Technically, the thoughts that are being generated as you're listening to my words right now are having an effect, ping-ponging throughout the entire universe. It's going to take some time, sure, but that's what we're dealing with now. Whether we could change the weather if we all decided to work together and we're able to understand that, I think that may actually be possible. I've
done that once in a seminar that I gave of about 1,200 to 1,500 people, and we concentrated on breaking a water main, and it happened. It was, not exactly the most positive thing to do.
I was going to say that doesn't sound very nice.
Yeah. Well,
I'm going to be really suspicious if a water main breaks near me now. I'm going to be thinking to myself, was that an accident? Was that coincidence? Exactly. But anyway, so something interesting, getting back to the core of what we were talking about. This does happen every 400 years, and this comes with extreme hot and extreme cold, extreme snow, extreme floods, extreme droughts, extreme famine. In fact, the last couple million death famines were during the last solar grand minimum, which is what we're heading into now, as we've spent the last 350, 400 years or so slowly climbing back up to the grand maximum that occurred from 1950 to about 15, 20 years ago. And so we have that, and that's going to throw us a curveball.
Well, this is what you're talking about when you mentioned what's going to happen next, correct?
Well, sort of, because it's not going to be like before. Because last time this happened, people that looked like me crossed the Atlantic Ocean in wooden ships and declared this land to be theirs, even though there were people who were already living here quite happily and successfully. That was during the last time. There's evidence of hardship during these periods, but it's not cataclysmic. So what's different this time? Because we are seeing a big difference this time. Well, the difference this time is for the last 10 to 100 solar cycles, Earth's magnetic field has been utterly powerful, but it is fading very, very quickly right now. And this is happening as Earth's magnetic poles are shifting. Now,
So
this
that
is
magnetic pole shift is occurring.
right. Absolutely.
Well, that we should talk about first, and then we can understand more what you're going to tell us. Okay?
Sure.
Tell
Right,
us
well,
about the magnetic shifting poles, because we've all heard all of this rumor about the colossal damage during a pole shift. Well, explain what that is to us. I need to hear it from an expert, too.
well, unfortunately, for those who like the movie 2012, we're not talking about a geographic thing, and we're not talking about the tectonic plates actually flipping around and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
But it's still fairly scary.
Okay.
So here's where we stand officially, and this is not disputed or secret information or anything else like that. You can find this information on NASA and the European Space Agency's website. Basically,
Okay. Why can't we find it on an American space website?
you can find it on NASA.
Oh, okay. That's what you call it. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if there's an American space agency other than NASA, I don't know about it.
Okay.
You know,
All right.
so basically, what they tell us is from the 1800s to about the year 2000, somehow Earth's magnetic field lost about 10%. Now, that's 10% over about 150 years. In magnetic terms, that is a huge number because, you know, we think of magnetic reversals, these pole flips, as happening tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
at 10% every 150 years, that's just 1,500 years till all of the magnetic field is gone, right? Well, so that indicates that this is something different. Well, from the year 2000 until the year 2010, we lost 5% more. Now, just extrapolate that out forward. By 2020, we will have lost that same 10%. It will have only taken 20 years for us to have lost what took us 150 years to lose the first time. What if it's only a year and we lose another 10%, then a month?
But what does that mean then? What does that feel like? What is that like?
Well, what does it feel like? Now, that is a brilliant question, and not one I'm sure I can answer, but I'm going to think about it a lot. What it looks like is the interface between energy from space and the atmosphere, the ground, the core of the Earth, is going to disappear. All of
oh God, what does that mean?
Well, I mean, it's going to disappear, you know, in the sense that you know, we're not going to turn into Mars or anything like that. We're not going to lose our atmosphere, but for a brief period of time while the field reverses, there's probably going to be only about 5 to 10% of the magnetic field that Earth is used to having. Now, while this plus Earth actually has an electric shell called the ionosphere in between the atmosphere and the magnetic field, that will actually offer a lot of protection as well. But what that is going to mean is that the energy from space is going to have a direct shot at Earth. Now, how does this work? Well, to get a thorough explanation, details of what I'm about to tell you, you'd have to go and spend about 40 minutes or so at earthchanges.org. It's where I've broken down how these magnetic changes are allowing things on the sun to do these effects on Earth, and we give specific examples. We show you what happens on the sun. We show you what happens on Earth. You know, and it's the kind of thing where whether you're saying, okay, well, when's the next thing on the sun, or, well, when was the next thing on Earth? No matter which way you look, you go and you look at the other side, and there was a correlating event on the sun and the Earth. Now, this wasn't always the case or as statistically significant, as robust of a correlation in the past, because the only way the sun has these effects on the weather, on our health, on earthquakes, on our technology, on volcanoes, is electromagnetic effects. And this come in two forms. These come in wave forms in terms of X-rays and ultraviolet, most things from solar flares, and they come in particle form, charged particle form, which would be in the solar wind, in the coronal mass ejections, the huge bursts that the sun actually pumps out. And so these electromagnetic waves and these electromagnetically ionized particles are the main way that energy from space affect the Earth. Now, what are we talking about here with the magnetic reverse, the magnetic weakening? We're talking about Earth's magnetic shield. It is the electromagnetic interface with that electromagnetic energy from space. Now, why does this have such an effect on our planet? Water. Water is a polar molecule. It has incredible interactions with electricity. And all you really have to do to see this is go to your kitchen, find a plastic, a little piece of plasticware, like a plastic spoon or something. Turn on your faucet so it's just like a millimeter wide stream, something very, very thin. And then, as silly as it might sound, take that little plastic spoon and rub it on your shirt or rub it on your hair or something like that, get up a little static charge, and then put it about an inch away from the stream. And watch as the water bends to touch your spoon. And then watch what happens as the water actually does come and hit the spoon. Everything is equalized and the water goes straight down again. I encourage everyone to try this, because if they do, they will understand a simple principle. And that's that water is going to want to go towards these things. It's going to want to go
towards what things?
Towards higher current, towards electricity, towards electromagnetic fields. It gets caught in there. It loves to go there. I've got a number of experiments from our plasma laboratory in Georgia where we actually show this. We actually get water to, ignore gravity and try to jump upwards just using electric current. And when you understand this principle and the fact that Earth's magnetic field has connection points all throughout it, and that we have electric currents going through the atmosphere and through the ground as well, and that there's water vapor all throughout the atmosphere and in the soil and obviously in the oceans and the lakes and everything. And when we're talking about weather, we're talking a lot about water. When we're talking about fault lines, we're talking about highly conductive, cracked areas where a lot of water has gotten in. Where you're talking about a lot of the places where deep earthquakes occur. This is a little science nugget from somebody who spent a lot of time researching it. A lot of it happens to occur in water-rich olivine. It's a green mineral, and it's found a lot in the mantle.
Hey, Ben, listen, we're all very novice out here. We don't know what you're talking about. Give my listeners the plastic spoon and water faucet thing again, and then amalgamate it to earth, water, and electromagnetic currents. Can you do that so we'll understand?
Sure.
Okay.
Just to make it simple.
Silence speaks volumes.
The simplest way I could put it would be that when it comes to the weather, we're talking about water. Even on a bright sunny day, the atmosphere is full of water. The wind pushing, going up and down, side to side, it's full of water. And this thing we've been talking about, Earth's magnetic field, it interacts and connects with the planet all over the place and goes through the atmosphere. And when it weakens, it will let the sun's electromagnetic energy come swirling into the atmosphere. Basically, it's our shield. It's blocking it out. When we don't have that there, we have a stronger electromagnetic influence in the atmosphere. And simply put, that's going to affect the water. That means it's going to affect the storms. It's going to affect the wind. It's going to affect how much rain falls and where that rain falls. This is some of the pattern changing I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if you just think about a fault line, it's a crack, right? There's a lot of water that gets down in there. Right. That water is affected as well and tends to move more when there's more electromagnetic energy. In fact, some scientists even say that electric currents start to flow through the ground during earthquakes. Essentially, this could get very complex very quickly. But when you think about it, weather is about water. The places where earthquakes happen, the cracks in the ground, are full of water. A lot of them are just full of water. And the way that the sun affects the planet is by affecting the water. And the thing standing in its way is disappearing as Earth's magnetic poles.
What thing standing in...
The thing we've been talking about, the Earth's magnetic field, our shield.
Okay, got it. Okay. Huh.
A lot of people are wondering. A lot of people can see the changes, but they struggle to find an answer. Folks who study the sun and Earth's magnetic field know that the sun affects the electric currents that go through the atmosphere and therefore affects the water and things like that. But nobody's quite put these two together. It just so happens that we are seeing every time the sun has a big event now, a solar flare, or every time it does something energetic, we see a similarly energetic thing on the planet. Usually it's in the form of a tropical storm or a much higher than expected rainfall. And, there's the question that exists certainly. Well, we're seeing this correlation. Okay, no doubt when the sun is doing this now, and this is what I'm talking about at earthchanges.org for the last 2 years. Basically, every time something happens on the sun, we're getting this thing happening on Earth. Every time something happens on Earth, if you want to look at it from that perspective, sure enough, when you go look at the sun during that time, it's doing the same kind of stuff. And so the question is legitimate. Why in the world would this be the case now when you just go back to 2013 and no such similar correlation can be found at this level? You go back to the year 2000 and the correlation looks even weaker. You go back to 1950 and you say, wow, that's you don't even see any connection at all. Why in the world would this be happening now? Why in the world would there be
why?
Connection? Because the only thing standing in the way, Earth's magnetic field, is weakening.
Why?
Well, that's a good question. There's evidence that it's happened every few 100,000 years on the planet. There's nothing that really correlates with it. There's not a set pattern to it. They say the last one was hundreds of thousands of years ago, but they do say we are overdue for another one. Why it happens? That's an excellent question. A lot of people have theories. Many of them boil down to just, it's just something the Earth does. It's a cycle.
That's why I was mentioning there's 36,000 year time cycle, 6,000 years, 760,000 years. The Atlantean thing of 750,000 years with deluges every 500 years, blah, blah, blah. I have a question, though. Does something influence the sun?
Oh, I'm sure it does, but, it's difficult to monitor for things like that. I mean, if we're talking about something massive coming in, we're going to have to rely on all these folks who want to be the first person to say, haha, NASA, I found this before you. Trust me, they're out there and they've got equipment that is just about as good as the big boys, as, the people.
But maybe Raymond had some kind of answer too. They get their messages from all the other realities.
I've seen evidence of everything from being able to tap into the ether to being able to really understand your consciousness. I've seen things that 10 years ago I would have said, get out of here. That's science fiction. But it comes down to trust, and you have to trust them. The difference is when you can actually see it for yourself, when it's explained at a level that 12-year-old students are understanding and writing papers about. It's a little different because you don't have to trust anybody but yourself. You can see it with your own eyes. You can do it, and not only can you do it, but you can show other people that you can do it. That is a different kind of proof. I always tell people to have an open mind and keep yourself open to all of these amazing ideas that are available out there. But be very, very careful because...
Let me ask you a question, Ben.
Sure.
Do you think these ideas that the younger generations are having are as a result of their imagination or their memory?
That's an interesting question. If you're talking about some kind of thing that's passed down through their DNA, no. If you're talking about the fact that if you want to get technical about it, if you knew everything about even just one tiny little particle in the universe,
you'd know everything,
Theoretically, you'd know everything.
Right.
Those are signals that at some point, I think our brains might have actually understood how to use.
Well, I would call it soul memory. I would marry this conversation with soul science and say it's either past life memory or observational memory or maybe memory from watching Earth from another place. I want to tell you something that I've never mentioned to anybody. I had a vision. I don't know how this happened. I was not on the Earth. I was maybe in a ship or something, and I saw the oceans of the Earth splashing into space. Doesn't that also describe what you were saying about water, electromagnetic power of water?
It might be. It might not be. It's tough to visualize exactly. It's the kind of thing that at least it certainly sounds like it belongs in the same conversation. Again, that's a thing that, unless somebody else was given that exact same experience, it's always going to be more meaningful for you than it is for anybody else. And it doesn't diminish it at all. It's just that's one of the sick, twisted ironies of things like this,
Sure.
And you do find a lot of that, like, you'll never be able to understand or explain the things that really happen to you, to anyone else. I had a wonderful conversation about this at the 2015 Conscious Life Expo. I don't know if you are going to know any of these names, but I was actually on a panel with Nassim Haramein, David Wilcock, Greg Braden, a number of other folks who are into a lot of this stuff. And
I know about Greg Braden is the zero, what do you call it? 0 point.
Right.
Correct?
Well, he has a lot of interesting ideas, and I know he talks about that as well. But, they were all discussing how, it was mostly David Wilcock who was discussing that, he believes he remembers his past lives. A lot of people think he's crazy, and they might be right. But this is very real for him.
Me too. I remember mine. I'm not all of them, but I remember.
Yeah.
Sure.
And, I'd like to think we're all a little crazy, but
well, I think that's the only way you have progress. If somebody has the courage enough to be considered crazy.
Exactly.
But then let me get. I wish I had been there for that seminar and so forth. But let me just ask you, what does this mean? Because you say it's getting ready to happen. So the impact of the sun on our weather, and the solar flares and coronal holes etc. What is that going to mean to us having to get up at 6 to go to work at 9? What is that going to mean?
It means hotter summers. It means colder winters. It means more rain when it's raining. It means longer droughts when you have a drought. It means the earthquakes will be bigger. They will happen more often. The volcanoes will erupt more violently and will erupt more often.
Oh, I see.
And most importantly, we will actually become vulnerable to activities on the sun. You know, we have a lot of water in our bodies. And in addition to that, you know, it's easy to think of our brain and our neurons and our, you know, our nervous system as being electromagnetic, but do you know that it pales electromagnetically in comparison to your cardiac system? Your cardiac system is way more electromagnetic. Do you know that there are dozens of peer-reviewed papers showing the connection between cardiac events like heart attacks, strokes, things like that, with these solar events? And it seems to be an increasing correlation. And it's not just cardiac events. It's everything that might be affected like that. I mean, all you have to do is talk to a nurse who works in a psychiatric ward and ask them what happens on full moons. This is very real stuff. And here's the thing. The only thing standing in the way of the sun having a direct electromagnetic shot at you, the magnetic field, is weakening. All of these things, the weather, the earthquakes, our health, all of these things are, I'm not going to say driven fundamentally by electromagnetism, but the notion that electromagnetism can affect them is virtually undeniable. And the only thing standing in the way of gigantic electromagnetic fluctuations at our planet is disappearing, our magnetic field. That is the big fundamental principle. Now, interestingly, we get to see right now other planets going through something similar to what we're going through. They're not going through the magnetic reversal, but they're dealing with what the sun is throwing at them, and that's, you know, this drop in sustained activity for a much lower baseline, but much more fluctuating activity, which is what's going to cause the fluctuating electricity on Earth. But, you know, all the planets are showing signs of change as well.
Do you think our knowledge or non-knowledge of ourselves is contributing to the weakening of the electromagnetic pulse?
You know, that's interesting. I've thought that it's a really bad idea to be spinning magnets to produce electricity in our magnetic field because we're just stealing it from the planet. Every ounce of electricity we use is stolen from the thing that's supposed to protect us from space. What if, you know, what if the Atlanteans weren't the only ones? And what if the humans have risen on this planet many, many times, and every time we start to use too much electricity, we throw it all away?
Right.
You know, that's another topic for another day.
Well, no, wait a minute. It is a topic for marrying this stuff that we call crazy, relating to soul memory, soul experience, etc., recognition of the collapse of the gravitational pull, because you're talking about that too, aren't you?
I'm not talking about any changes to gravity.
Okay. Well, whatever, the electromagnetic shift, all of this is interplayed with the other, because we might, if we don't remember what caused it before by using up too much Earth electricity, then we're going to do it again.
Oh, it would be it would be far worse not to, my friend. I know it sounds terrible. It would be far worse not to. This is a necessary thing. Our ancestors,
not to remember? Is that what you meant?
It would be far worse to do something to try to disrupt the natural cycle of our planet. You know.
No, I'm talking about remembering how the mistakes we made affected the planet previously.
Well,
because
you
we've
can
been
call
through,
them, you can call them mistakes, but maybe it's just what needed to happen.
Right.
For that.
And I am really now concerned with where does the role of humanity come in to the interplay of solar events and solar energy. I think that's where my focus is right now because of the sense of the things I went through before: fear, uncertainty, chaos, etc. And you explained that, and thank you for that. It does affect. I'm trying to determine how we can, and maybe I'm asking, can we prevent an EMT?
Oh, and I'm telling you, we would not want to. We would not want to. We would not want to prevent this magnetic reversal. It is something that is.
Why? Tell me.
It's very much needed for the health of our planet.
Mm.
This is the kind of thing that one hopes is going to be still a few decades to 100 years off, and we'll have some time to maybe, fly some people up into ships, wait it out, or find some other way to do it, maybe at the bottom of the ocean. It's not going to be very fun here on the surface, but if Earth does not cycle its magnetic field, we'll lose it and we'll become like Mars. The planet will die. There is no getting around.
What do you think about that? And I'm asking this question not to flare up the popular consciousness here.
Well,
I'm asking. Wait, let me just say, because I feel that, and I don't know what to do with my projected feeling. Am I then participating in it?
You don't have a choice, and whatever the energy takes you towards. If you're well-intentioned and you intend to be well-intentioned, that's intention, and you can affect that, and you'll make the right decisions. It's when you stop caring about people and you only care about yourself, and you get greedy and you lie and you do things like that.
No, but wait a minute. There's other ways to care.
Of course.
Okay, but wait a minute. If I guess my question is, if my priorities were more to save the earth and nature more than to save mankind, what would that be?
If the earth and nature includes all the plant and animal and insect and bird species here, we're probably the worst. We're probably the worst thing that ever happened to this planet.
Wait a minute. Say that again.
If you're talking about the health of the plants and the other animals and insects and birds of this planet, we are unquestionably the worst that ever happened to this planet.
What is the worst? Humanity?
If we're talking about the well-being of all those other living things on this planet, yes, humans are the worst thing that ever happened to them. I don't know how anybody could argue that. There's nobody in the world that could argue that, actually.
But then, what do you say if we don't argue that and we say yes, we are the worst things that ever happened on the planet? How does that affect the consciousness projection of the future?
Well, you have to recognize also that we were once much worse, and much worse before that. You can be on a trending path. You can be on a positive path and getting better, but you don't have to lie to yourself and think you're perfect. That's crazy. I mean, we are way.
Do you think you're lying? Ben, do you think you're lying to yourself if you say, "Oh, everything is fine"?
Certainly. Everything's not fine. No matter where you look, things aren't fine.
Or everything will be fine.
Oh, everything will be fine on a long enough timeline, absolutely.
So it's a question of the timeline.
Yeah. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to live to see things be fine again. But eventually things will be fine again. Because here's something interesting. You and I are sitting here having this conversation. So no matter what the Atlanteans went through, no matter what any of the Sumerians or any of these other folks went through, we made it here today to tell these stories, to be able to have this discussion. And that's that's probably not an accident either. One day, everything will be okay, and hopefully we'll be better than we are now. We're going to get another shot to try. Now, granted,
give me. I know all the declinations of and even though, but where do we fit, in your opinion, if you don't mind talking about this? Where do you fit with other life in the universe that has intelligence?
You know, I love having the discussion of what they think, what they must think of us.
Right.
Whether we are undiscovered, discovered and ignored, discovered and slated for extermination, whether we're a nursery, whether we're a zoo. There are, I don't know how well there are a lot of good ideas, actually.
I know. But, I often think, because I'm in show business, I think, oh yeah, we're their entertainment. We're for them like what we turn on the TV to do for us.
To be honest, the zoo hypothesis and the nursery hypothesis are unquestionably my favorite.
Very, very good.
Yeah.
Oh my God! This is. I love sarcasm for this reason. It's based on, oh my God, what we think is really good or really bad. Forget it. Oh Lord. Well, all right. Tell me about the earthquake in California.
Well,
let's hear it.
Interestingly, that's one of the few places that hasn't gone off big time. And when I say big time, I mean hasn't had like a magnitude 7, magnitude 8 in many, many years. Just about all the other places around the Ring of Fire have had them. That's really not going to be fun when it happens. I'm hoping my sister, who lives in Los Angeles, will reconsider not moving back east. But do
you have a kind of projected timeline on it?
Well,
that's where I am at this minute.
That's a fantastic question. If nothing changes, and here's the thing, if the patterns that we can observe now stay and hold true, and assuming that the same thing that happens millions and millions and millions of years in a row, the same cycle over and over again, is the same cycle we're experiencing now. And then it's not just going to say, oh, I don't feel like doing the cycle this time, I'm going to stop. That'd be a heck of a bet to make. But just in case the Earth feels like continuing its millions and millions of years of cycles, and just in case we're in that now, the observations from the last 150 to 200 years suggest that we're on the scale between a decade to 3 or 4 decades before things get utterly terrifying. The good news is that there is evidence of this thing sort of pulling, I don't know what you call it when, you're on a steep down slope, but then you sort of level off for a while and then you go back down further. There's evidence that there can be periods where things level off and they sort of quiet down for a little bit, before another plunge, albeit, but if that happens, it could be as long as 100 to 150 years before things get utterly dangerous on the surface. The kind of thing where the number of tornadoes, hurricanes, typhoons, etc., things like that doubles. When you get a powerful windstorm, it's nothing. It's not uncommon to get 60, 80, 100 mile an hour winds. The tornadoes and hurricanes that do happen, imagine we're talking about 300 mile an hour winds. Imagine we're talking about.
You say considering the cyclical behavior pattern of millions and millions of years, that we're on that timeline, and so that is going to happen unless what?
There is no unless. There's nothing that can be done. And to be honest, like I said earlier, it would be far worse to do something if we could, because if we interrupt this magnetic cycle on Earth,
got it.
We don't just get thrown into chaos for a few centuries. We turn into Mars and everyone dies. So it would be far worse not to. But the other good news is we're having this conversation, and we have stories from our ancestors who may very well know and feel about this. So somebody's going to be around to tell our story afterwards, which means a lot of us make it.
Can I bring this down to earth a speck?
Sure.
Tell me what do you think chemtrails are, or do you know?
Well, they are a psychological operation born out of a very, very real scientific test that was an absolute failure. Put it this way. If you Google cosmic ray chamber, that's all you have to Google. You'll see what looks like this chamber full of dusty particles or whatever, but these lines streaking through it, they look like chemtrails that just appear out of nowhere. What has to happen for this is there has to be a certain atmospheric chemistry, and you need to have a lot of energy shooting through it. Normally, Earth's magnetic field blocks out all this energy. It's not doing it anymore. It takes almost nothing to create a contrail now. If I was standing on, up in the sky and I swung a golf club or a baseball bat, I'd create a contrail. I would create a contrail right now. There's so much vapor from warmer oceans, and there's so much more electricity from a weaker magnetic field that a lot of what people say are chemtrails, they are actually mistaken. And it's a shame because to a keen eye, it's easy to tell they're mistaken, and it makes them look bad, when in reality, this thing was a very real conspiracy. It was a very real secret. They really did test spray these things. But, if you go and you look on the internet, you would think that they're spraying in every single city and every single day all over the world. And that's just not happening. The only other thing I have to say on it is, without question, and bear in mind, this is coming from somebody who is on their side. This is a very real thing. The notion that they could spray something over your head and then you start to get itchy or get a rash or something, unfortunately, that is in your head. There is no physically possible way for these things to come down in less than a year, and most of them stay up in the atmosphere at least 2 years, which means that whoever is spraying, they're not directly spraying any one people or anything like that. They're spraying themselves, they're spraying their families, they're spraying their children. So there has to be, and they know it. Not just the public.
Who's they? Wait a minute, I'm lost. Who's they? I
have no idea. But if we are operating from the position that there is chemtrailing going on, and I am under the position that there has been a conspiracy, there has been a secret. If you are going to go to the farthest extreme you can find on the internet on the topic, I happen to believe you have made some errors. However, the thing in general is real. However, there is no physically possible way for these particles to come down in less than a year. And frankly, it's close to impossible for them to come down in less than 2 years. Whoever is spraying out of the planes, whoever is ordering it being done, they're spraying themselves and they're spraying their children, and they know.
Oh, I see. I see.
So whatever's going on.
But what?
So whatever's going on, it's also not that. I mean, if you look on the internet, you can see they're spraying poison, they're spraying viruses. Come now. They're trying to control the atmospheric chemistry. That's absolutely true. But they do know that they're spraying their children, they're spraying themselves, they're spraying their world. And that's something that we should all take into our considerations as well. It's one thing to have an open mind, but to wake up twice and not just be open-minded to these things, but be a suspicious observer about them, and be able to admit when people who seem to be on your side are just completely clueless and wrong with what they're saying. Just because somebody has an open mind and they appear to be on your side chanting for the same cause, just go on the internet and look around.
It's not the question. It's not the question of on whose side. It's a question of, or maybe there is no such thing as the truth.
Well, I would have to say in the chemtrail world, there's definitely the folks who are there's three sides. There's the people who don't have any clue what the heck you're talking about when you say chemtrail. There's the scientists and corporations and government individuals advocating it, and then there's everyone against it. And I don't think, you know, I don't think I have to tell anyone who's into the chemtrail stuff that some of the people who are against chemtrails, like I am, are absolutely freaking crazy. Their theories are without fact. They're just, they get terrified every time an airplane goes overhead. Their arguments hold no water. They lack both logic and actual fact. And we all know this, that, yeah, there's a million different ideas. They can't all be right. There's nothing wrong with realizing that, hey, just because somebody looks like they're chanting for the same thing you are, you know, be a suspicious observer. Don't just be awake.
But you know, Ben, you're into my territory here, because what if the truth is that
hold on, wait a
minute.
Opinion, this is something I have very strong opinions about. What if I said
I didn't finish my sentence. Let me finish.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you did.
It could be that all these different believing truths are true, because it's all about each individual experiencing his own experience for whatever the reasons are they came in for.
There is a difference between believing that and feeling that and experiencing that, and it really being true, because many of these ideas propose diametrically opposite things.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that all these truths, if you really look at the democratic genius of points of view, there is no trumpable truth singular. I'm saying everyone is looking at this from their own perspective. And whatever, I guess what I'm saying is life itself is an illusion. And you're living in the illusion that services your learning better.
That may be true from a macro perspective. But what about when you're actually in here in the matrix playing the game, and you actually have to live with the practicality of all of these things? However,
that's your point of view. You decided to be a thump on it scientist. Somebody like me, who's mostly imaginative, I could easily talk myself into, or wouldn't even have to talk myself into, thinking none of this is happening, what you're talking about.
But does
and live in a reality, from my perspective, live in a reality that is untouched by future problems.
Yes, but do you see how there's a difference between you experiencing the reality you create and the fact that the reality you've created is wrong? You just didn't have the time to realize it. Because let's say in that world, you happen to find a magic plant that makes you live forever. Trust me, you live that out long enough, you're going to find out you're wrong.
Well, wait a minute. I will just only believe the magic plant will help me live forever, but that's my truth. And by the way, don't we all live forever? Nobody can prove death occurs.
On this planet we can. I'm talking about practical.
I'm talking about soul death.
But that's not what we were just talking about. We were talking about the practical decisions and the practical consequences that we have to live with in this world. Now,
I know that, but then it might be more practical to just imagine an entirely different thing.
I was going on the situation you set up. The situation you set up was that you could say, hey, I'm going to live out my days saying none of this is going to happen. And, the only way that would be possible would be if you outlived this actually occurring. If you died before the thing actually happened, yes. If you chose to deny it and live that way, according to your experience, this would be not real. But that's only because you didn't live long enough. Had you lived long enough.
That's why I can fool around with this notion, because I'm 82. Of course, I can fool around with this notion. It won't happen to me. So
But
therefore,
what
it's
about
not real.
people? What about a 32?
No, but I'm not saying that it is or it isn't. I'm just saying that one's reality is different from every one's reality.
Yes,
That's
but
all.
that does not help you deal with a very real, practical, consequence-driven situation like this. That
I
is
know.
something. That's more of like, are you going to choose to live your life angry at people, or are you going to forgive them? Are you like, that's really creating your own reality and your mindset.
Sure.
There's a big difference between the two things we're talking about there.
Oh, a huge difference. And I realize that you're a scientist and that you need to live in the world that to you has third dimensional reality. Being the world I live in has many more dimensional realities to me.
I understand that,
And
but how is that
yeah,
more than a mental exercise for people? Something that
maybe, and it might be a mental illness too.
well, no, I disagree. I meditate. I believe in people being able to do astral traveling. I believe in a lot of these things, but it is a simple fact that apart from the own experiences that you are able to have yourself, it is all theater. It is all a mental exercise. And when you're talking about creating your own reality and all those other things, that doesn't help you when you're talking about a pole shift, when you're talking about a magnetic reverse. It might help you spiritually get ready for the other side if you've given up or you happen to see a tidal wave coming at you. But
Yeah.
in terms of some of the questions you've asked, well, what should we be doing? What should we be watching for? What should we be thinking? You can't at all have your head in another dimension when you're thinking about those things. You have to be as practical as you possibly can be. Yeah.
Well,
nice
the most practical thing I can think of is to not worry about it because of the drama of the dimensional truth in the disaster. What the hell can we do?
Well, I want to be one of the people that survives.
Oh, okay. How would you go about that?
That's a 3-hour show on prepping, my friend.
Okay. You know what, Ben? This is really terrific, but it's over. I don't need to take your time up anymore. I just want to tell you one thing. I listen to your voice when I listen to your earthquake reports and your tidal wave reports on my web, on my computer. Your voice it's very influential in believing that what you say is factual. I just want you to know that. I recognized your voice immediately and I thought, oh my golly, this is Ben. This is the one I've been listening to. Because people don't even know it's you, I guess. So I'm just serving your individualism here. You're really good.
Well, I appreciate that. I thank you very much. And I do suppose it is that time. I can't wait to go play with my little daughter now. It's time for the best part of the day.
Have a good time. Wouldn't it be wonderful?
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
No, me too. My pleasure. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Have a good evening.
Okay, babe. Bye. In the Health and Wellness Center tonight, go within yourself and ask how you can be peaceful relating to the chaos of the future.